And we're back. So welcome back, Luch.
Hey David, how are you? Good
We're going
afternoon
well.
to you all.
Okay, so we're continuing our conversation. Last time we got together, we were talking a bit about this whole idea of having a flowchart for your sales process. And I think today's conversation is really going to sort of move into that whole notion of having a sequence of communication. So an auto
David,
response.
last time we got together, we spoke about 7 touch points, and you recommend 7 touch points to go to a contact with, and each of those touch points intended to further develop the relationship that you have with them. So yeah, based on that, this is kind of an extension of that, because now we're talking about how do we incorporate those touch points into a combination of telephone follow-up calls, email follow-up calls, and just general communication that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So spot on. Look, I suppose if we think about prior to the internet, the sort of thing we would do is we'd actually use like a card system, and I would speak to you on the phone, and I'd make a note of when I spoke to you, and I might I might even physically mail you some correspondence, and I'd make a note to follow that up. And the whole philosophy of 7 touch points was really about making sure there was enough interaction that by the time we got together, there was a trust relationship. So the beauty of the internet and the beauty of the modern day CRM is we can do a lot of these things automatically, or also known as automagically, by creating a sequence or a campaign of emails that not only educate our client, but there's another aspect to this, which is engagement. Because when we talk about touch points, a touch point can be from me to you. It can also be from you to me.
Yep.
I suppose the premise of what we're talking about today is really, you know, I often talk to people about writing a newsletter for their business to keep in touch with prospects. And sometimes people have this quizzical look in their eye about, well, hang on, what do you mean prospects? They either bought or they didn't. And we might have their contact details in our system, but how do we keep in touch with someone who hasn't bought from us? So we're sort of talking about this whole notion of having a newsletter, but probably more specifically, because I think newsletters are sort of a thing of the past to a large degree in a lot of industries. I think people's attention span is shrinking quite dramatically, and their expectation of an email is that it's actually useful or interesting, and it's also in the right context or timing for where they are in their thinking right now.
Yeah, and generally in the past, an email has been, I guess, something to share events that have happened that might be of interest to both of you. Now, in the past, news about these types of events have been really, really difficult to get to. Now, we didn't have social media, we didn't have the web, we didn't have email and the thousands of emails that come to our inbox every hour. And so receiving a newsletter, whether it's physical post or some company sending out a list of things that have happened over the last month, has been really welcomed. Now it seems that this is dime a dozen, and you're getting your new news and feed and everything else from all sorts of places. And so sending out a newsletter per se is kind of a Me Too strategy, and does it really set you apart and differentiate you?
Yeah, and I suppose that's the real distinction we wanted to talk about today is, look, the key aspects of a newsletter is having some sort of recency, so making sure that you're in constant communication with people. And the other component is frequency. That's the repetitiveness or the amount of times you can keep in touch with someone without being annoying. Now, the traditional newsletter used to have multiple sections in it, and people would invest a lot of time to building that, to making sure that it was quite valuable, and people could either print it off and go and sit on a couch somewhere and read that. I think that the attention span of people these days is very short, so I would rather take that newsletter and break it up into several components and send them out in some sort of sequence. But even more importantly than that, what we can start to use now is we can tap into people's buying cycle and work out where they're at, and actually make sure the information we're sending to them is relevant to what their sort of psychology or their thinking is at that point in time. So this whole notion of being able to track someone through their purchase cycle or through their interest cycle based on history, based on experience, and then providing the right information at the right time is something that you can really do quite effectively these days.
And that assumes that you know what the buyer cycle for them is. They'll go from several stages, one where they're completely unaware that they even have a problem. and they might go through a level where they are aware that they have a problem in whatever aspect of their business, but they're not sure how to deal with that problem, or they're not sure what solutions are available. They might, the next level up might be that they are aware of solutions that are available, but they're not aware that you are able to offer that solution. And so depending on the level of awareness that your prospect or your lead is at will determine the different ways to communicate to them. Because after all, if there's somebody who's hot to buy, for example, you don't want to be teaching them the fundamentals of the whole thing. You want to be sharing with them things like pricing information and service delivery information and the like. Whereas if there's somebody who doesn't even know that they've got a challenge, a communication challenge within their environment, then selling them a product or offering them a product is probably not the thing to do. So knowing which stage of a life cycle that they're in will help you determine the type of communication that you can provide to them. And this is fortunately something that becomes a lot simpler these days to get via the engagement that you get from sending a simple email. You might send them an email that contains links to different topic areas. For example, it might be an email about, since we're on the topic of CRMs, it might be an email about CRMs and the benefits you get from automating your communication. That email might contain 3 different links: a link to a product, a link to a service strategy, a link to costs. Well, not every person is going to click on each one of those links, but certainly based on the link that they do click on and the information that they can then consume afterwards, helps you build a bit of a picture about where they're at and how to best communicate to them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And so really, like this whole philosophy is around, I call it telemetry. And what I mean by that is you don't have to reply to my email for me to understand where you're at. You can just click on a link. So by having options within an email for 2 or 3 choices that people can make to either download a cheat sheet or a checklist or an ebook or watch a video, I can start accumulating data on that person's choices as to what they're interested in. So this is really a bit of a turnaround, because in the old days, the only way I could work out what you're interested in was to ask questions and take notes. And if you didn't respond to my questions, so if I rang you and left a message and you didn't respond, I would have no idea. If I sent you an email and you didn't reply, I'd have no idea. All I could tell was whether you opened it or not. But now what I can do is, not only can I tell that you opened the email, I can actually see which hyperlinks you clicked on to find information. And this is why content-driven marketing is so critical, because I don't have to ask you questions. I just have to offer you free content in 5 different areas and see which content you chase. And as you chase it, I can tell at my end that that's something that's of interest to you without having any conversation. So this telemetry makes our autoresponder sequences or our email campaigns really quite powerful. Because now I can actually have a conversation without ever talking to you or even getting a reply from you on email.
Oh, now, David, you do want to talk to them in the end.
Oh, look, the truth of sales is the best way to make a sale is face-to-face with a human. So yeah. The issue that we really have is that people are hiding behind their computer, and they're getting more and more difficult to talk to. They've got better gatekeepers, better filtering systems on their communication. So the only things they're letting through is things that they see of value. Now, traditionally, that means that if I use telemarketing today, for example, versus 10 years ago, it's nearly 10 times as hard to get through. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means it costs 10 times as much to create the conversation or the communication. Now, same with email. 5 years ago, I could send out a newsletter and I'd get responses to that newsletter, which were potentially responses to offers. So now what we're finding is that people don't respond unless there's some sort of interaction requirement. So we can either have questions that we throw in, and sometimes we can throw in a single question and say, please answer this question, what's your biggest challenge within your organization? And people will respond to that to get access to something. Okay. In other situations, we don't even need to go that far. What we can do is purely just give them some options to choose on clicking links. And what that does is allows them to actually tell us what they're thinking without actually communicating. So it's just really a way of creating that interaction. And I think it's so valuable. So we might try and go through some quick examples on this, Luch, so that people can get a feel.
Share your examples with me, David.
Off you go.
Off I go.
Don't want to put you on the spot here or anything, but it's your turn.
Okay. So examples. Well, take an example where you're sending a first piece of communication out to a client. And you might, in the first instance, you might turn around and say, hey, welcome and thanks for being a part of the family, depending on how you introduce yourself. You might offer them some additional information. In fact, one of the things that we first send out is making sure that they do receive our communications. How often does email end up in spam? And especially the more we get to automated systems, the more this needs to be something that gets addressed. So one of the first things that we do is we turn around and say, welcome to the family. As a matter of interest, you will want to whitelist any emails that come to you from whether it's Luch or Conversion Leadership or Semantia or any of our companies. Now, whitelisting is just the process of making sure that our stuff doesn't end up in their spam and making sure that because we send useful stuff and stuff that will be of interest and stuff that will be readily acted upon, that we send this stuff and that they actually receive it. So, that we do this. We don't provide the instructions in the emails. We provide the instructions on the website. So they have to click through to the websites to get that. Now, we can record the fact that they clicked. I mean, this is a really simple example, and it's not meant to sound like spying or anything, but we can kind of ascertain that they're making steps towards an ultimate call to action. And so the first step is making sure that we're whitelisted. And so we can tell that they've clicked through to the whitelist page. The second one might be following us on LinkedIn or something like that, inviting the people we're communicating with to follow us on places like LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. We don't necessarily go for the Facebook side of things, but certainly those other social networks or outside of the email communication, because we also offer useful stuff there as well. And so again, we can view them as they click through to our profile. So we can see all of this. Now, when I say we can see all of this, it does get recorded that they clicked on these links. But more importantly, it allows us to act on these things in real time with automation. Now, let's say we have, following on down the track, let's say we've sent a series of emails out to somebody. So over the course of, say, 5 or 6 weeks, there's been a series of emails. And in each one of those emails, we've asked them to take some small step towards a purchase. So in the first instance, it might be, hey, join us on LinkedIn, or make sure that you click through and whitelisted our account. In the second instance, we might offer them a white paper or a document on how to better nurture your leads. In the third instance, we might turn around and offer them help with analyzing their Google Analytics, for example, and how much traffic is actually getting to their site, and how is that traffic converting. So there might be a range of things that we might, simple things that we might offer them as part of an analysis of where they're at. We can tell the engagement levels that we've had with each one of these contacts until ultimately we've allow the campaigns, or allow the sequences, what's a better way of putting it, allow the automation to follow a course that is best tailored for them. Yep.
Okay. So that's good. I mean, I can cite the example we use here. I think one of my favorite ways I do this is, if I'm meeting someone for the first time, I'll send them out an email and it's got 10 links in it. And each link is to a short video that I've created. And each one of those videos touches on a different aspect of business. And the statement in the email says, here's some videos that I've recorded that you may find useful. Please feel free to click on any of the links that you think are relevant to you. Now, every time they click one of those links, it actually now tags them in my system and says, this guy was interested in time management, this guy was interested in lead generation, this guy was interested in recruitment. So without them even replying to any questions, I've already started to build this profile that I can use to actually decide what the buying motives are of that prospect. Mm. So I think everyone who is sort of out there in the sales world today, you don't need to use these tools because, you mentioned it before at the end, sales is a face-to-face game. But what we're doing is we're giving ourselves an opportunity to educate ourselves and also our client or prospect prior to the actual face-to-face engagement. And I think this is one of the tools that's available that I think a lot of people aren't utilizing as effectively as they can. And what does it do? It does a couple of things. It allows us to deal with very low qualified leads because we have an automated system, which means we're not wasting time or investing time in sort of developing a relationship from zero.
Because
Yeah, allow
traditionally the approach is that you would have to answer and nurture each and every call manually, regardless of whether they would become a qualified lead or remain an unqualified lead and possibly a dead lead. Each one
yes.
of those would require manual time. And how long does it take before you find out that they're not going to be a worthwhile lead?
Yeah, and the other side of that is I don't know till I make the call. So I'm making a lot of calls, I'm investing a lot of time prior to actually knowing whether they're qualified. Now, the traditional way of dealing with that was to try and get pre-qualified leads. Now, that's a double-edged sword because when I get pre-qualified leads, it actually narrows my market. So I don't want to get unqualified leads, I want qualified leads. So having the nature of this system allows me to broaden the top end of my funnel so that I can have totally unqualified leads and not even care because I'm not doing anything with them. They're actually managing themselves through my process, and my system will tell me when they're qualified as opposed to me having to find out from them whether they're qualified. Now, it sounds interesting. Some people say, oh, who needs unqualified leads? And my answer is, if it takes zero effort to manage an unqualified lead, why wouldn't I get one?
What does it matter?
Right, and so this is the beauty of automation, and I think a lot of people miss this point, and I use this same philosophy when I teach people how to recruit. And one of the biggest issues with recruitment is that, when we go out looking for someone to fill a role within our organization, we're usually strapped for time. That's why we're looking for an employee. And so being strapped for time, we don't have the time or the luxury of interviewing, 20 potential candidates. So we just look at one or two, and we usually have to pick. So we pick one out of two, which is generally the best out of a bad bunch. So if we think about recruitment in the same way, I encourage people to actually interview in groups. And so we've got 20, 30 people applying for a job, because when 20 or 30 people apply for a job and we have a qualification process, we've got a much better chance of getting a high caliber.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we do a similar thing with recruiting. We don't necessarily do group interview process. We have a recruitment process as part of our CRM. It's a pipeline, if you like. It's a set of processes that happen. And we're constantly getting people who are applying for roles that we have open. The only time that those people make their way through to us is if they score within a particular range of a high performance exam that they've got to do, a little high performance assessment that they've got to do. Once they're at that level, and once they've passed that, they get fed through to us. Otherwise, they either get nurtured or rejected. And so we don't get to see them unless they're fit for our market.
So I suppose where this conversation is going is really the tools that are available now to actually qualify people in advance to actually communicating with them physically are pretty cost effective, and they're quite interactive, so we can do a lot of our pre-qualification in sort of an automatic way. Now, to do this, we need to actually take what we used to do manually, which is in our heads, and convert it into a interactive communication process. So an autoresponder sequence these days isn't just a matter of having 10 emails that follow each other. It's a matter of saying, well, what are we trying to identify? What are the hot buttons we're looking for, and how can we tell if someone has those hot buttons? So therefore our system starts to do the qualification for us. And it's not high-level qualification we're talking about here. It's not an intense one-on-one conversation. It's just about allowing this funnel to have a very wide top to it, so that anyone can join, anyone can enter, and the system won't really let them come through to our desktop until they've demonstrated that they're a potential client.
Right. There's two things that come to mind. One is that one of the sessions that we had on this early on, we talked about the key number one thing that you need to have with regards to a sales process or a sales funnel is a goal. And so in the same way as everything else, if we're building a process and we're building an autoresponder series that's going to be effective with what we're trying to do, having a goal for the autoresponder series is going to be critically important. There's no point in just stringing out a series of emails. It's making sure that there is a goal with all of this. The second part of it, which I now forget, is, what is it, 3 types of people in this world. There's those who can count and those who can't. So I'll leave it at there, and maybe it'll come to mind a little later.
That's pretty funny. I don't know if you set that whole thing up or not.
Of course I did.
You know, it's like the old adage about, what's the secret? What's the 2 secrets to effective marketing? Number 1 is don't tell them everything. So we'll move right along there.
We will.
Yeah. Look, fundamentally, I suppose what we're talking about today is this whole notion of having some sort of sophisticated process that people can go through to get educated on what you do and how you work. During that process, I'm looking for telemetry, so ways to identify buying units. So I don't just wait till they get to the sequence of 10 emails and go, right, they're ready to call. By that point in time, I should be able to identify some key traits or some key interests within that person by using the telemetry that I can build into my marketing campaign, my email campaign. And to do that, we need to provide attractive, like, let's call them lead magnets or content or hooks. And it could be simple videos, it could be checklists. There's a whole lot of different components we can use, but I'm looking for you to tell me information about yourself by what you click on in my email.
Yeah, and that's really, really important. And I knew there was a reason why I didn't remember the second thing before. It was so you could share us that piece of information, because it leads on to the fact that it's not about having timed emails, emails that are for a specific time period. It's the notion now of introducing evergreen content as part of your marketing mix. And this is the thing, whether it's in, as you said, checklists, Roche has translated in another means. What really makes your service important? It's those kinds of things, as opposed to, hey, it's Monday the 22nd today, is it? It's 20th today. It's the 20th. It's the 20th of whichever month you would like it to be today. And it's not about sharing the news of what happened today or what happened last week or what happened a month ago. It's now thinking in terms of evergreen content, because chances are these processes will be around for a while and will get tuned. But the idea is that once a person starts in one of the processes, they'll go through to the end and ultimately be presented to you as a qualified lead.
Yeah, so I suppose the simple message out of today is that we need to start creating these autoresponder sequences, or let's call them funnels, for want of a better term. And they're really just evergreen content, which takes people from being interested in what we do or interested in the benefit of the product or service that we offer to an educated prospect. And if we can do that through automation, we save ourselves a lot of time, but it also means we can open the floodgates and allow lots and lots of leads to come into our system and not be overly concerned about being inundated with bad quality leads.
Yeah. Now, somewhere on this page, I don't know which direction it's going to be, but there's going to be a bunch of download links that you can happily get access to them, and that will provide you with more help about how to think in terms of evergreen content versus timed content.
Yeah, because it is a process. There's a series of questions, I suppose, that people need to go through just to sort of identify what is the particular components that we need to build, what's the information I'm looking to extract from those prospects, and how do I use that information to trigger a sales call or an email that goes out asking a question or whatever it might be for an engagement. So really, in simple terms, we're looking for a funnel that's automated. We're looking for steps along there that are actually building our knowledge of the prospect at the same time as building the education of the prospect, and some trigger points to actually make sure we know when to turn it into a interactive, like a verbal communication, so either telephone or even email or face-to-face, as opposed to just going through an automated sequence.
Yeah, let's make it intelligent. We're all about intelligent processing and intelligent automation, and this is the key about how to get your sales process achieved in an intelligent way.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think anyone who takes this on as a project will actually, it's an eye-opener to how much business you can generate by actually having an automated process in place, which actually takes most of the pain and the work away.
So until next time, when we present you with some even more tips and tricks about how to we start getting into more detail, more practical about how to get this, how to get sales process implemented in Infusionsoft, Aweber, MailChimp, and many of the others. It'll be really useful.
Yeah, I suppose we've talked about the theory for a while now, Luch. I think in our next session we need to actually open the bonnet and look underneath and make sure that we can show people specifically how they can start building this. So I'm looking forward to that next session. I know it's going to be quite tech, which is your favourite area.
I'm looking forward to it again. There'll be 2 things that I cover.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to hear number 3. All right, have a great week.
Thanks, David.
And,
have a good
we'll
one.
speak to you soon. All right, cheers.
Cheers.